There are 4 massive stones sitting in the middle of Waikiki Beach. They are in the vicinity of tourists snapping photos of the waves and ignoring the stones. For decades, the story behind these Ngā Pohaku Ola Kape Māhū stones was buried, erased. The story was rewritten by people who had a reason to make sure the truth stayed hidden. And the truth is this: these Hawaiian stones honour 4 healers who are neither man nor woman, but something the Western world denied. If you've ever felt like your body was a costume someone else picked out for you, if you've ever sat in a room full of people who love you and still felt utterly alone in your own skin, then this video is for you. What happened to gender-fluid identities across the globe aren't just history, it's a mirror. And it might explain a wound you've been carrying that you didn't even know had a name. Part 1. The loop nobody talks about. Here's what's coming in this video. We're taking a journey through indigenous cultures on nearly every continent that once celebrated people who existed between male and female, not as an exception, but as a sacred function of society. And then we'll take a look at the systematic, deliberate destruction of that sacred function by colonial powers who needed a rigid male-female binary system in order to control the people they conquered. Let's get this straight. By the end, the question isn't just what happened to them. It's what happened to us and why does it still hurt? Part 2. A world that once made room. Long before anyone drew a line down the middle of gender and said, pick a side, dozens of indigenous societies had already figured out that human beings don't fit into 2 boxes. The Zapotec people of Oaxaca, Mexico have Muxes, who are individuals assigned male at birth, but who live as women and who are woven into the culture as artists, embroiderers and keepers of tradition. Every November, the town of Juchitán hosts La Vela de las Intrépidas, which is a massive festival celebrating Muxe identity that draws visitors from all across Mexico. Rather than existing on the margins, Muxes are considered essential to family life, often staying home to care for aging parents while siblings marry and move away. In Hawaii and Tahiti, the Māhū Polynesian figures occupied a space between genders, serving as healers, caretakers, and keepers of cultural traditions. Their role extended into education, as the Māhū were often responsible for passing down hula, chant, and genealogical knowledge to younger generations. Across native North America, Two-Spirit people, a term that covers at least 155 specific tribal identities like the Navajo Nadlihi, Dine, and Ikwewikazo/Dagokwewi among the Ojibwe, held ceremonial and social roles that were considered essential, not just tolerated. The umbrella term Two-Spirit itself is relatively modern, coined in 1990 at an Indigenous LGBTQ+ gathering in Winnipeg, Canada, to reclaim these identities from colonial language and pathologizing labels. European colonizers often viewed Two-Spirit people with hostility precisely because their integrated social standing contradicted rigid gender binaries imported from Christians in Europe. For the Inuit, this third sex wasn't just a social role. It was a profound part of their mythology, their shamanistic mediations, and their families. It was common for a child to be cross-dressed until puberty to carry on the identity of a deceased relative, regardless of their biological sex. This wasn't about sexual orientation. It was about ensuring the soul's journey and the spirit's continuity within the community. Consider the Navajo Nadlihi, or He Changes. They were deeply respected for their ability to perform tasks associated with multiple genders, for their perceived compassion and care. Think about that word, changes. It implies a fluidity of consciousness and an ability to adapt and encompass the full spectrum of human experience. It's a stunning contrast to our modern world, where we are often frozen by the fear of not fitting into a single, predefined box. In South Sulawesi, Indonesia, the Bisu were shamans who bridged the human and spiritual worlds precisely because they embodied both masculinity and femininity at once. Traditionally, Bisu served as advisors and ritual specialists to Bugis royalty, presiding over coronations, weddings, and agricultural ceremonies believed to require their unique spiritual balance. Though their numbers have dwindled under pressure from stricter religious interpretations, a small community of Bisu still practices today, particularly around the town of Segri. The Hijra are recognized broadly across South Asia today, and they have deep roots in ancient Hindu texts. The Hijra males typically assume feminine roles and hold sacred ceremonial responsibilities at weddings and births. Their spiritual authority is tied to the belief that Hijra blessings carry special potency, capable of ensuring fertility and prosperity for a new couple or newborn child. In 2014, India's Supreme Court legally recognized Hijra as a third gender. a landmark ruling that formalized protections rooted in thousands of years of cultural precedent. The Sakalava Sokrata of Madagascar are individuals assigned male at birth who display feminine behavior as children and are raised as girls, adopting feminine appearances and performing specific ceremonial duties. This identity is understood within Sakalava cosmology as something innate and spiritually ordained rather than chosen, often identified through signs interpreted by elders or diviners early in a child's life. The Sokrata frequently take on roles tending to royal tombs and sacred relics, which are positions considered too spiritually delicate for those outside their unique status. The Mapuche Machi of Chile and Argentina are religious authorities and healers and can be of any gender, but often exhibit a sacred fluidity that allows them to interact with the spiritual realm. Historical accounts suggest that male Machi who took on feminine dress and roles were once especially common, seen as uniquely equipped to mediate between the human and spirit worlds. Today the role is predominantly held by women, though the position's spiritual authority remains tied less to fixed gender and more to a Machi's perceived connection to Mapuche cosmology and the ancestral spirits known as Pilan. So these are not examples of tolerance. This is architecture. These identities were load-bearing walls in the structure of society itself. Carl Jung talked about the anima and animus, which is the idea that every person carries both masculine and feminine energy inside them, and that wholeness comes from integrating both, not suppressing one. These cultures built entire spiritual systems around this idea centuries earlier. Part 3. When the wall came down. Now here's the part that should make your stomach turn a little. Third gender cultures didn't fade away naturally, they were extinguished on purpose. European colonizers arrived with a rigid, heteronormative binary worldview wrapped in religious language, and they used it as a weapon. As the modern scholar Dr. T.J. Talley put it, a white heteronormative patriarchy that supported colonial violence. The French sociologist Émile Durkheim spoke at length about anomie, a terrifying state of normlessness where the social bonds connecting an individual to their community are completely severed, leaving them adrift in a sea of isolation. Christian and Islamic missionaries labelled gender fluidity as sinful, as deviant, and used that label to justify the conquest itself. The logic went like this: if these people are morally corrupt, we're not invading them, we're saving them. That's not just cruelty, that's righteous cruelty. The British Empire went further, criminalising the Hijra community under the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. The British government banned the Hijra from public spaces and performances, treating an entire spiritual class of people as a category of criminal. Residential schools in North America tore Indigenous children from their families, specifically to sever the chain of language and sacred knowledge passed down through generations, including the understanding of gender itself. Third-gender individuals were forced into binary labour systems, and in many cases, physically targeted to dismantle matriarchal and gender-fluid kinship structures that colonizers found threatening. Existentialist philosopher Frantz Fanon wrote extensively about how colonization doesn't just take land, as it takes identity and forces the colonized to see themselves through the eyes of the colonizer. That's precisely what happened here. An entire cosmology of gender was rewritten by people who needed to justify what they were doing. Friedrich Nietzsche talked about the genealogy of morals, which is the idea that the concepts we take for granted as absolute, unchanging truths, like right and wrong or the strict binary of identity, are actually historical inventions. They were created by people in power to control human behaviour. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher who deeply studied how institutions control human bodies, expanded on this with his concept of biopower. Foucault argued that modern states use institutions like medicine, law, and schools to regulate our very physical existence, forcing us to police ourselves. When an individual has experienced trauma, they often internalize the message that they are fundamentally broken or that they do not fit into the world. Foucault's work shows us that the feeling of not fitting in is actually proof that the system is working exactly as intended. If you've ever experienced abuse from someone who insisted their version of reality was the only one, who made you doubt your own truth just to maintain control, then you already understand this pattern on a personal level. Colonization is that same dynamic, just at a large scale. Part 4, Reclaiming What Was Stolen. You might be thinking that this topic is heavy and it happened a long time ago, so what does it have to do with me now? Fair question. Here's the answer. The scars are still open. Third-gender communities today experience staggering rates of poverty, housing instability, and violence. They experience the direct economic aftermath of having their traditional spiritual and social roles destroyed generations ago. But something remarkable is happening simultaneously, which is revitalization. As previously stated, India's Supreme Court has legally recognized Hijras as an official third gender, legally striking down the final institutional ghosts of the British Criminal Tribes Act. Today, activists continue to push for transgender welfare boards to provide housing grants and university quotas, directly tackling the systemic poverty inherited from colonial rule. In North America, Two-Spirit leaders are rewriting tribal laws to include gender-inclusive language. Out of 574 federally recognized tribes, only a handful historically carried these protections forward. But that's changing. Organizations are working with UCLA's tribal law program to audit and revise tribal codes, ensuring marriage equality and legal protections under tribal sovereignty. The National Congress of American Indians revived its Two-Spirit task force, bringing openly Two-Spirit leaders together to influence federal policy and advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, MMIWG-2S. And the BAAITS, Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirits powwow in San Francisco, has become a landmark event, completely decolonizing traditional powwow spaces by allowing participants to dance in whatever regalia aligns with their spirit. In Hawaii, cultural practitioners like Kumu Hina have restored the authentic history, Mo'olelo, through exhibits, documentaries, and public art. Meanwhile, Māhū-led healthcare initiatives like Māhū Ola provide culturally grounded healing spaces for youth, reconciling their identity. And in Oaxaca, Mexico, the Muxés focus on preserving the Zapotec language itself, because Muxé doesn't translate cleanly into Spanish or English. Elders are teaching younger generations the vocabulary that validates their identity. Their diaspora communities now host Vila Muxé festivals in places like Los Angeles, maintaining cultural obligations across borders. These reclamations are what philosopher Albert Camus might call acts of rebellion in the face of absurdity. They're not violent, but persistent. Camus believed meaning isn't handed to you as you have to build it through the act of continuing to show up, creating and refusing erasure. These communities are living that philosophy. These revitalization efforts aren't just political, as they're also philosophical. They challenge the Western assumption that gender must be binary, fixed, or biologically determined. They echo Judith Butler's argument that gender is performative, being shaped by culture, ritual, and meaning. These revitalization efforts resonate with Indigenous worldviews, where identity is relational, spiritual, and fluid. Part 5. Why this should matter to you. Maybe you're not Zapotec, not Native American, not Hawaiian, and not Hijra. Maybe none of these specific histories are yours. But if you've ever had your identity dismissed by someone with more power than you, if you've ever been told the way you exist is wrong, disordered, sinful, or shameful by a parent, a church, a system, an abuser, you already know the emotional terrain these communities are walking. The reclamation happening in Oaxaca, in Waikiki, in tribal courtrooms and welfare offices in India isn't just about gender. It's about the universal human need to define your own reality after someone else tried to define it for you. The modern world wants you to be a cog in the machine. It wants you to fit into its neat, tidy, binary categories. But the soul, as the Indigenous philosophers have always known, is wild, fluid, and glorious. Existentialist Simone de Beauvoir argued that we are not born who we are, we become who we are through choice and action in the face of what the world tries to impose on us. These Indigenous communities are becoming their truth, out loud and in public, after centuries of being told not to. That's not just history, that's a blueprint. It's a blueprint for anyone who has ever had to fight to reclaim a truth that was taken from them. This is proof that it can be done, and that the sacred version of yourself the world tried to bury can still come back into the light.